In these parashiyos of Shmos that we are reading, we have learned of the incredible, overwhelming circumstances of our ancestors in Egypt. From the beginning of Chumash Shmos, we saw the overwhelming nature of their barbaric circumstances, the oppressive labor, the torture, the throwing of the babies into the dehumanization of the Jew. And now, of course, in last week's parasha, this week's parasha, and to next week's parasha, Moshe Rabbeinu comes on the scene as the ambassador of God, ushering in the period of emancipation, the period of freedom, which ultimately culminates with Yetziat Mitzrayim, the exodus from Egypt. But before Moshe Rabbeinu comes and faces down Pharaoh, before his interactions with the tyrannical leader of Egypt, HaKadosh Baruch Hu engages Moshe. And there's an incredible conversation that occurs. The Torah says this is the beginning of Parsha Shmos, Perek Gimel, 3rd chapter. Vayomer Hashem says to Moshe, Ra'o ra'isi es ani ami asher b'Mitzrayim. I have seen the affliction of my people in Egypt. Ves tzakasam shamati mipnei nogsav, and I've heard their cries because of the taskmasters. Ki yatati es machavav, for I know their suffering. And the Svarim point out something amazing. The wording here is strange. Hashem says to Moshe, Ra'o ra'isi. I mean Ra'o ra'isi. If you translate that into English, it's I've seen, I have seen. I've seen twice. The pasuk doesn't need to say it. You could just say Ra'isi, Vayomer Hashem Ra'isi as ani ami asher. I have seen the affliction of my people. Why the double wording? And the Svarim, the Hasidic literature, it's brought down such a profound insight that Hashem was saying to Moshe, at first glance you could see the suffering, but if you really want to understand the suffering, you have to look even deeper. Ra'o ra'isi, even kiviyachal I Hashem, I look down and I see their suffering. But when you look down, you see one level of suffering. But then when you look even further, you see even more layers of their suffering, even more layers of pain. Kiviyachal Hashem saying, even I, God, saw one layer or one dimension of suffering when looking down from above, but then saw an additional layer of suffering when I looked into their circumstances even more. Ra'o ra'isi, a double peering, a double looking. I didn't just look from 1,000 feet. I didn't just look at a panoramic view, but I've really looked into their hearts. I've looked into their souls. I've looked into their homes, and I've seen the dynamics of their suffering. And it struck me as such an incredible idea, because here you have HaKadosh Baruch Hu saying to Moshe, even I, God, Kiviyachal, whatever this means, but even I, God, I could look at the suffering on a superficial level, or I could look deeper into it and understand the true dynamics and multiple layers of their difficult circumstances. And I think this teaches us an incredible lesson. A lot of times in life we see things and we think that when we look at something, we've got it all figured out. Right? I interact with a person for a little bit of time. They speak a certain way, they dress a certain way, they present a certain way. I've got them all figured out. I've got them all figured out. And then sometimes again, we find out that there's more to the story and that we were wrong. Or sometimes a situation occurs in life and I'm frustrated and I'm upset and I say, oh, terrible, terrible, terrible. Or something else happens. Oh, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And then only to find out later that which looked terrible was really wonderful. And that which looked wonderful wasn't all that great after all. Ra'o ra'isi. If the Ribono Shel Olam needs 2 acts of looking in order to understand the true nature of the particular situation and circumstance, then imagine how many acts of looking and peering each of us require in order to go ahead and truly understand the other, or in order to truly understand the circumstances. The Chazal teach us that the Arba Minim, the 4 different species that we take on Sukkot, the Lulav, the Esrog, the Hadassah, and the Aravas, each of them correspond to something else. And we know that the Hadassim, the myrtle branches, correspond to the eyes. And we know how many times do you have to, how many branches do you take? You take 3 myrtle branches. And the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh says something amazing. Why 3 myrtle branches? Because the truth is, if you really want to understand something in life, you look at it once, you don't understand it. You look at it a second time, you don't understand it. Maybe if you take the time to look at it a 3rd time, you'll begin to understand it. We have to avoid the temptation to judge people and judge circumstances based on a cursory, superficial glance. And so many times in life, we walk around with anger towards the other. We walk around with frustration towards life simply because we've sized things up with one quick panoramic view. And the Ribono Shel Olam tells Moshe Rabbeinu, Ra'o Ra'isi, I am God. But even me, it took 2 glances to truly understand the enormity of their suffering. Let's take a little bit more time to look. Take a little bit more time to peer. Take a little bit more time to gaze and to understand the other. Don't be quick to judge. Don't jump to conclusions. Don't automatically assume that this life circumstance is wonderful and this is terrible. Ra'o Ra'isi. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu needs 2 peerings, 2 gazings, 2 lookings to truly assess the circumstance, then we must take our time to truly arrive at the truth regarding others and regarding our situations in life. Wishing everyone a wonderful day.